The Discovery captain, Rebecca Stone, had seen many strange things during her 15 years with the International Lunar Exploration Program, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She stood in the observation dome of Tranquility Base 7, watching the sun rise over the Sea of Serenity, when the call came through from Mission Control Houston. The voice on the other end belonged to Director Michael Grant, and he sounded different. Not excited, not worried, but something else entirely. Uncertain, maybe, or perhaps amazed in a way that made him forget his usual composure. The seismic sensors had picked up something unusual 3 days ago. A pattern of vibrations coming from beneath the Taurus Mountains, about 40 kilometers from the base. At first, the science team thought it was just another moonquake, the kind that happened when the lunar surface contracted during the cold night cycle. But the pattern was too regular, too precise. It repeated every 6 hours and 23 minutes, like a heartbeat or a signal. The decision had been made quickly. Rebecca and her team would investigate. Now she stood beside her crew in the equipment bay, checking their suits one final time. There were 4 of them making this trip. Beside Rebecca was Lieutenant Jack Morrison, a geologist from Australia who had spent the last 2 years studying lunar formations. He was tall and lean, with hands that moved carefully over every seal and connection on his suit. Next to him was Dr. Amara Okafor, a Nigerian physicist whose theories on quantum tunneling had won her 3 international awards before she turned 30. She was shorter than the others, but her eyes held an intensity that made everyone pay attention when she spoke. The 4th member was Chun Wei, a Chinese engineer who could fix anything mechanical with whatever tools he had available. He once repaired a rover using nothing but wire and a broken solar panel, and the rover still worked 2 years later. They loaded their equipment into the lunar transport vehicle. The LTV was a 6-wheeled beast designed to handle the roughest terrain on the moon. It had served Rebecca's team well on dozens of missions, but this time felt different. As they rolled out across the gray dust, Rebecca kept thinking about that signal pattern. 6 hours and 23 minutes. Why that specific timing? What could produce such regularity beneath hundreds of meters of rock and dust? The journey took 3 hours. They drove in relative silence, each crew member lost in their own thoughts. Jack occasionally pointed out interesting rock formations, his voice crackling over the suit radio. Amara ran calculations on her wrist computer, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. Chun hummed an old Chinese folk song, barely audible, but somehow comforting in the vast silence of the moon. When they reached the coordinates, they found nothing unusual at first glance. Just another stretch of lunar highland, covered in the same gray regolith that blanketed most of the moon's surface. But the seismic readings were strongest here, right beneath their feet. Chun set up the ground-penetrating radar, while Jack collected rock samples from the immediate area. Amara monitored the readings on her tablet, her expression growing more puzzled with each passing minute. The radar showed something impossible. At a depth of 370 meters, there was a cavity. Not a natural cave or lava tube, but a perfect rectangular space measuring roughly 2 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide, and 300 meters tall. The walls of this cavity showed a density reading that made no sense. The material was denser than any known element, yet it reflected the radar waves in ways that suggested it was partially transparent at certain frequencies. Rebecca made the decision without hesitation. They would drill. Chun had brought a compact drilling rig designed for deep core sampling. It took them 4 hours to set up the equipment and begin the drilling process. The drill bit, made of diamond carbide composite, should have cut through lunar rock like butter. Instead, it took 6 hours to penetrate just 300 meters. Whatever lay beneath them was fighting back, or perhaps the rock itself had changed somehow. The drill bit came back scarred and heated to temperatures that should have been impossible in the cold, lunar environment. When they finally broke through, The drill suddenly dropped freely for half a meter before hitting something solid again. Chun pulled up the drill, and they all gathered around to look at what came back. Attached to the drill bit was a substance that none of them recognized. It looked like metal, but it was warm to the touch even through their insulated gloves. The color shifted as they moved it, going from deep blue to silver to something that hurt their eyes to look at directly. Jack tried to scratch it with a diamond-tipped tool. The tool broke, and the substance remained unmarked. Amara ran every test she could think of. The material conducted electricity perfectly at temperatures where most conductors would become resistive. It had no measurable magnetic field, yet it responded to magnetism by rotating slowly in their hands. Under spectroscopic analysis, it showed emission lines that did not match any element on the periodic table. Some of the wavelengths it emitted were outside the visible spectrum, extending into ranges that their instruments could barely detect. They lowered a camera drone down through the drill hole. The drone's lights illuminated a space that defied description. They were looking at the interior of something vast, something that had been hidden beneath the lunar surface for an unknown amount of time. The walls were smooth and curved, covered in patterns that seemed to move when observed directly. The floor was visible 300 meters below, and resting on that floor was a structure that made Rebecca's breath catch in her throat. It was a ship. Not a natural formation, not a human vessel, but something built by intelligence that was not from Earth. The design was elegant and alien at the same time. It had no visible seams, no windows, no obvious engines or weapons. The hull seemed to flow like liquid metal frozen in mid-movement. Geometric patterns covered every surface, patterns that changed and shifted as the drone's cameras swept across them. Some of the patterns appeared three-dimensional, rising from the hull surface even though the camera readings showed the hull was perfectly smooth. Rebecca contacted Mission Control immediately. The response took 8 seconds to arrive, the time it took for radio waves to travel from the moon to Earth and back. Director Grant's voice came through, and this time the uncertainty was gone, replaced by barely controlled excitement. He ordered them to wait for additional support, but Rebecca knew that support would take days to arrive. The nearest crew was at Copernicus Station, 200 kilometers away. By the time they arrived with heavier equipment, the chance for first discovery would be shared among dozens of people. She made the decision that would change everything. They would enter the cavity. Chun rigged a cable descent system using the drilling equipment as an anchor. The 4 of them would go down together, document what they found, and return before support arrived. It was against protocol, possibly against direct orders, but Rebecca had now traveled 40 million kilometers from Earth just to wait for permission to explore. The descent took 20 minutes. They rappelled down through the drill hole, their suit lights cutting through absolute darkness. The walls of the shaft showed that strange shifting material, the same substance that had damaged their drill bit. As they descended, Rebecca noticed something odd. Her suit computer kept adjusting her oxygen mix, compensating for readings that made no sense. According to the sensors, the air pressure in the shaft was fluctuating wildly, going from vacuum to nearly Earth-normal atmosphere, and back again in cycles that lasted only seconds. They reached the floor of the cavity and stood together in the vast darkness. Chun activated a magnesium flare, and light exploded outward, illuminating the impossible ship before them. It was even larger than it had appeared on the drone footage. The hull rose above them like a cliff face, smooth and perfect, and covered in those shifting patterns. Rebecca approached the nearest section and placed her gloved hand against the surface. The moment she touched it, everything changed. The patterns on the hull began to glow with soft blue light. The light spread outward from the point of contact, racing across the entire surface of the ship like liquid flowing uphill. Within seconds, the entire cavity was illuminated by that strange blue radiance. And then they heard it. a sound that should not exist in the vacuum of the moon, a tone, low and resonant, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It vibrated through their suits, through their bones, directly into their minds. Jack stumbled backward, his voice tight with shock over the radio. Amara was scanning frantically with her instruments, the readings scrolling too fast to follow. Chun stood perfectly still, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. Rebecca felt it too. The sound was not just a sound. It was information, data being transmitted directly into their consciousness. She understood, in that moment, that the ship was communicating with them. Asterisk. An opening appeared in the hull. Not a door sliding open or a hatch releasing, but space itself seeming to fold away, leaving a passage where solid metal had been a moment before. The interior glowed with the same blue light, revealing a corridor that extended into the ship. The walls were smooth and organic, more like the inside of a living creature than a mechanical vessel. Strange symbols lined the corridor. Flowing and changing like water running uphill. They entered together, moving slowly and carefully. The moment they crossed the threshold, Rebecca's suit alarms went silent. She checked her readings and felt her heart skip. According to her instruments, she was no longer in vacuum. The air pressure inside the ship was Earth normal. The temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. Her oxygen levels were stable without her tanks. Impossible. All of it was impossible. Yet, it was happening. The corridor led them deeper into the ship. They passed through chambers filled with equipment that defied understanding. Machines that seemed to exist in multiple places at once, their components overlapping in ways that hurt to look at. Screens displaying information in symbols that changed meaning each time Rebecca tried to focus on them. Amara stopped at one console, running her scanner over the surface. The readings made her gasp. The console was operating, powered by an energy source that her instruments could not identify. The power output was enormous, yet there was no heat, no radiation, nothing that conventional physics would predict. They found the first body in the third chamber. It was not human, but it was humanoid in a way that made Rebecca feel deeply unsettled. The being had been tall, perhaps 3 meters, with 4 arms and a head that was too large for its body. But what disturbed her most was the state of the corpse. Parts of it seemed to be in different stages of decay. One arm was skeletal, another perfectly preserved, a third appeared to be aging in real time as they watched. The being's face showed an expression of absolute terror, frozen in its final moment. There were more bodies throughout the ship. They found 11 in total, all showing the same impossible decay patterns. Jack examined them carefully, his geologist training giving him insight into how matter changed over time. His conclusion was disturbing. The bodies had all died at the same moment, but they had also died at different moments. Some parts showed decay consistent with thousands of years, others with only hours. Time itself had fragmented around these beings, tearing them apart, not with violence, but with impossibility. They reached what could only be the ship's bridge. It was a circular chamber with a raised platform in the center. Around the platform were stations, each one marked with those flowing symbols. And above the platform, suspended in what appeared to be empty air, was a sphere. It was perfectly black, absorbing all light that touched it, and it rotated slowly, in a manner that defied any gravitational explanation. Looking at it made Rebecca's eyes water and her head ache. The sphere was wrong in a fundamental way, existing in dimensions that her 3-dimensional mind could not fully process. Amara approached the sphere cautiously, her scanner extended. The readings were catastrophic. The sphere was generating a field that warped space-time itself. Gravity bent around it in spirals. Time dilated and contracted in waves that pulsed outward with each rotation. The physicist in Amara understood what she was seeing even as her mind rejected it. This was a singularity, a controlled black hole, but it was operating in ways that violated everything she knew about physics. It was rotating in multiple directions simultaneously. It was expanding and contracting at the same time. It was there and not there, existing in a state of perpetual quantum uncertainty. Chun found the controls. They were not buttons or switches, but smooth surfaces that responded to thought. He placed his hand on one, and images flooded into his mind. He saw the ship flying through space, moving faster than light without using any visible propulsion. He saw the alien crew operating the controls, their four-armed bodies moving with purpose and confidence. He saw them activate the sphere, saw reality itself begin to fracture around them. He saw their terror as they realized what they had done. And then he saw nothing, because the images stopped making sense, showing events that could not happen, places that could not exist, times that were both past and future, and neither. Rebecca pulled Chun away from the console. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing rapid. He spoke in fragments, trying to describe what he had seen, but the words would not come properly. The ship, he said, was not meant to travel through space. It was meant to travel through reality itself, moving between different versions of existence, different quantum states of the universe. The aliens had built an engine that could navigate the multiverse, but something had gone catastrophically wrong. They had entered a space where the rules changed, where logic itself broke down, and their minds could not handle it. The ship had saved itself by freezing in a pocket of stable reality, burying itself in the moon billions of years ago, waiting for someone to find it, someone whose minds were different, someone whose thoughts were not bound by pure logic, someone like humans, who dreamed impossible dreams and believed contradictory truths and created art that made no rational sense. The ship had been waiting for them. The truth beyond logic. Rebecca made the decision to retreat back to the cavity floor. They needed time to process what they had discovered, to let their minds settle after the overwhelming experience inside the ship. Chun was still shaking, his words coming in scattered fragments as he tried to explain what he had seen when touching the control console. Jack sat against the wall, his geological training useless in the face of bodies that decayed in multiple time streams simultaneously. Amara was the only one who seemed energized rather than frightened, her physicist mind racing through possibilities that should not exist. They set up a temporary camp in the cavity, using their portable habitat dome. The structure inflated quickly, creating a small pressurized environment where they could remove their helmets and speak without the interference of suit radios. Rebecca contacted Mission Control again, this time providing a full report of what they had found. The response was immediate and predictable. They were ordered to withdraw immediately and wait for a full science team to arrive. Director Grant's voice was firm, leaving no room for interpretation. This discovery was too important, too dangerous for a four-person team to handle alone. But Rebecca knew they could not leave. Not yet. Something about the ship called to her, a feeling she could not explain with logic or reason. It was as if the vessel itself wanted them there, needed them to understand something crucial. She explained this to her team, expecting resistance or demands to follow orders. Instead, she saw understanding in their eyes. They all felt it. The ship was communicating with them on a level deeper than words or images. It was reaching into their subconscious minds, planting seeds of curiosity that could not be ignored. Jack was the first to speak. He described a dream he had during their brief rest period. In the dream, he walked through gardens that existed in spaces between spaces, where plants grew in directions that had no name. He saw cities built by the four-armed beings, structures that changed shape based on the thoughts of their inhabitants. He learned their history without words, understanding flowing directly into his consciousness. The aliens called themselves the architects, and they had existed for millions of years, before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from the trees. Asterisk, the architects had mastered conventional physics long ago. They had built ships that crossed galaxies, created artificial worlds, and even manipulated stars to suit their needs. But they had grown bored with a universe that followed predictable rules. They wanted more. They wanted to explore the spaces between realities, the quantum foam where possibility became actuality. So they built the sphere, the reality engine that could navigate the multiverse itself. They tested it carefully, making small jumps into nearby quantum states. Everything worked perfectly, until it did not. Asterisk? Amara added her own insights. During her examination of the sphere on the bridge, she had experienced something similar to Jack's dream. She understood, in a way that bypassed her scientific training, that the architects had made a fundamental error. They believed the multiverse operated on pure logic, that every reality followed mathematical rules that could be understood and manipulated. But they were wrong. Deep in the quantum foam, in the spaces between realities, logic itself became uncertain. There were places where cause did not lead to effect, where time flowed in loops, where objects could be two things at once without being in quantum superposition. The architects, with their minds built on perfect rationality, could not survive in such places. Their consciousness unraveled when confronted with true paradox. Chun spoke last, his voice steadier now. He had seen the moment of the ship's doom. The architects had jumped into a reality pocket where the fundamental constants of physics changed every few seconds. The speed of light became variable. Gravity reversed randomly. Particles that should attract instead repelled. The crew had tried to escape, but the reality engine had locked onto this unstable pocket, drawn to it like metal to a magnet. The ship's systems had saved them temporarily by creating a bubble of stable space, but the crew could not maintain their sanity. Their logical minds broke under the weight of infinite impossibility. In their final act of desperation, they had programmed the ship to find a stable location and bury itself, hoping that someday someone would discover it. Someone who could succeed where they had failed. Rebecca listened to all of this and understood the truth they were dancing around. The ship had not randomly chosen Earth's moon as its hiding place. It had calculated, across billions of years and infinite quantum possibilities, that eventually a species would evolve here. A species whose minds were fundamentally different from the architects. Humans did not think in pure logic. They held contradictory beliefs without experiencing cognitive collapse. They created art that served no survival purpose. They loved and hated simultaneously. They dreamed impossible things and then made them real through sheer stubborn determination. The architects had been looking for humanity before humanity even existed. The question now was why. What did the ship want them to do? Rebecca proposed they return to the bridge, but this time approach it differently. Instead of trying to understand the ship with their instruments and rational minds, they should simply experience it. Let it show them what it wanted them to see. The others agreed, though Jack looked uncertain and Shun admitted he was terrified. Amara seemed almost eager, her scientific curiosity overriding any reasonable fear. They entered the ship again, moving with more confidence this time. The blue light welcomed them back, the symbols on the walls flowing in patterns that almost seemed friendly. Rebecca noticed something she had missed before. The symbols were not just decorative. They were alive in some way, responding to the presence of human consciousness. When she thought about questions, the symbols rearranged themselves, trying to provide answers in a visual language her brain was learning to decode. The bridge appeared unchanged. The sphere still rotated in its impossible way above the central platform. The alien bodies remained in their various states of temporal decay. But this time, Rebecca did not approach with caution. She walked directly to the platform and stood beneath the sphere, looking up into its absolute blackness. She opened her mind, letting go of her need to understand through analysis. Instead, she simply accepted what she was experiencing without trying to categorize or explain it. The sphere responded. Images flooded into her consciousness, but they were not visual images in the traditional sense. They were understanding made manifest. She saw the multiverse as the architects had seen it, an infinite tree of branching realities where every quantum decision created a new universe. She saw the pathways between these realities, narrow corridors of stable space where travel was possible. She saw the dangers that lurked in the quantum foam, entities that had evolved in places where logic did not apply, beings that fed on consciousness itself. And she saw the architect's final gift. Before they died, they had programmed the ship to teach whoever found it how to use the reality engine safely. But the teaching could only work for minds that were fundamentally irrational, minds that could hold paradox without breaking. Human minds. The sphere was not just an engine. It was a test and a teacher and a tool all at once. It would show humans how to navigate the multiverse, but only if they could prove they were mentally flexible enough to survive the journey. Jack joined her on the platform, then Amara, then Chun. All four of them stood beneath the sphere, their minds open to its teaching. The experience was overwhelming and gentle at the same time. The sphere showed them mathematics that existed outside of normal number systems. It taught them physics where the observer and the observed were the same thing. It revealed navigation techniques that required thinking about impossible destinations until they became possible through the sheer force of belief. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, or perhaps days. Time had lost meaning inside the sphere's influence. When they finally stepped away from the platform, all four of them understood something fundamental had changed. They were no longer exactly who they had been when they entered. The sphere had altered their neural pathways, not through surgery or technology, but through pure information transfer. Their brains had been upgraded, given the ability to process paradox without experiencing cognitive dissonance. Chun approached one of the control consoles again, but this time with confidence rather than fear. He placed his hands on the smooth surface, and this time the images that came were clear and comprehensible. He could see the ship's systems, understand its functions, operate its controls. The reality engine was responding to him, recognizing him as worthy to command it. He looked at Rebecca with wonder in his eyes. They could fly this ship. They could take it out of the moon and explore the multiverse. But Amara shook her head. She had seen something else in the sphere's teaching, something darker. The ship had been buried here, not just to wait for humans, but to hide from something. The entities that lived in the quantum foam, the predators that fed on consciousness, they were still out there. The architects had attracted their attention when they activated the reality engine the first time. Those predators had followed the ship across dimensions, hunting it through infinite realities. The ship had only escaped by hiding in the one place the predators could not easily reach, a stable universe with slow-moving time, buried in dead rock on a lifeless moon. If they activated the engine now, the predators would know. They would come hunting again, and this time they would find Earth. Humanity was not ready for that confrontation. They needed time to prepare, to learn, to evolve their understanding of reality even further. The sphere had given them the foundation, but building on that foundation would take years, maybe generations. Rebecca understood the dilemma. They had found the greatest gift in human history, a technology that could let them explore infinite universes, but using it too soon could doom their entire species. She made a decision that would be debated for centuries to come. They would take some of the ship's technology back to Earth, enough to study and learn from, but they would leave the reality engine buried. They would set up a permanent research station in this cavity, staffed by the best minds humanity could provide. And they would prepare, slowly and carefully, for the day when humans would be ready to truly navigate the multiverse. Jack suggested they take one of the smaller devices they had seen in the ship's corridors, something that appeared to be a personal tool of some kind. Chun carefully extracted it from its housing, and immediately they all felt something change. The device activated in Chun's hands, responding to his upgraded neural patterns. It projected a holographic display showing nearby quantum states, other realities that existed parallel to their own. In one, the moon had never formed, and Earth was a water world. In another, dinosaurs had evolved intelligence instead of going extinct. In a third, humans had never evolved at all. The device was a quantum viewer, letting them see the multiverse without actually traveling through it. This alone would revolutionize human understanding of reality. Amara immediately began taking readings, her instruments struggling to make sense of the data the device provided. Jack documented everything with his helmet camera, knowing that what they were witnessing would be analyzed by scientists for decades. Rebecca simply stood and watched, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. They spent another 6 hours in the ship, carefully documenting everything they could without disturbing the critical systems. They took samples of the strange materials, recorded the alien symbols, and made detailed maps of the ship's layout. Chun managed to interface his portable computer with one of the alien consoles, downloading massive amounts of data that would take years to fully decode. Amara discovered a storage chamber filled with what appeared to be personal items belonging to the architect crew, artifacts that would provide insight into their culture and psychology. When they finally emerged from the ship and began their ascent back to the surface, all 4 of them knew their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just explorers or scientists or engineers. They were ambassadors to the multiverse, guardians of knowledge that could either elevate humanity to heights undreamed of or destroy everything if mishandled. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and exhilarating at the same time. The support team arrived 2 days later, bringing heavy equipment and 24 additional personnel. Rebecca briefed them on what had been found, leaving out some of the more esoteric details about the sphere's teaching until she could report directly to the highest levels of the International Space Agency. The cavity became a hive of activity as scientists set up permanent research stations and engineers began the delicate work of studying the alien ship without damaging it. 6 months passed. The Lunar Research Station grew into a small city with over 200 people working in shifts to unlock the ship's secrets. Rebecca and her original team became something like priests of a new religion, the only ones who had experienced the sphere's direct teaching. They trained others carefully, selecting candidates who showed the right kind of mental flexibility, the ability to think in paradoxes without losing themselves. Back on Earth, the quantum viewer device had caused a revolution in physics. Amara had led a team that reverse-engineered its basic principles, though they could not yet reproduce its full capabilities. The device proved definitively that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics was correct. Every quantum decision did indeed create a new universe. The philosophical and religious implications were still being debated in every nation and culture. Rebecca stood once again in the phone observation dome of what was now called Discovery Base. She watched the sun rise over the Sea of Serenity, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Humanity now knew, beyond any doubt, that they were not alone in the universe. The architects had existed and died trying to explore the spaces between realities. And somewhere in the quantum foam, predators waited, hunting for the energy signature of active reality engines. But Rebecca was not afraid. The sphere had shown her something else in those final moments of teaching, something she had not shared with anyone yet. Humans had an advantage the architects had never possessed. Humans were not purely logical beings. They could believe in things that made no rational sense and make them real through sheer determination. They could look at impossible odds and decide to overcome them anyway. They could love in the face of hate, hope in the face of despair, and create beauty in the midst of chaos. The predators in the quantum foam were creatures of pure logic, hunting based on mathematical certainty. But humans were creatures of impossible dreams and stubborn faith. When the day came that humanity finally activated the reality engine and ventured out into the multiverse, those predators would discover something the architects had never understood. The most dangerous thing in any universe was not the being with the most advanced technology or the purest logic. It was the being who could look at an impossible situation and say, with absolute conviction, "Watch me make this work anyway." Rebecca smiled as the sun cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across the lunar surface. Humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what her purpose was. She would prepare her species for the journey ahead, training mind after mind to think in paradoxes and possibilities. And when they were ready, when enough humans could navigate the spaces where logic broke down, they would take that alien ship and explore the infinite realities that waited beyond. The architects had failed because they were too perfect, too logical. Humanity would succeed because they were beautifully, magnificently flawed. And that made all the difference. Asterisk.